You know, every now and then in politics, a document comes along that's, well, it's more than just a list of policies. It's a full-on blueprint, a grand vision for where a country should go. It's not just about changing laws. It's about changing a whole philosophy and asking the entire nation to make a choice.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at one of those blueprints, a document called Project Reunification. Now, it was written specifically as a counter-proposal to the much-discussed Project 2025. So in this explainer, we're just going to break down what this competing vision is all about, sticking strictly to what the text itself has to say.
All right, first things first, what is Project Reunification really? Let's take a look at its core ideas to get a feel for what it says it stands for. So at its core, the project says its mission is all about strengthening principles like freedom and equality. And it doesn't waste any time setting the stage, It positions itself right from the get-go as a direct response to what it calls the authoritarian agenda of Project 2025. But, it's not all just policy and politics. There's a big emotional theme running through this. The project pretty much boils its entire goal down to this one simple phrase, a promise of unity and compassion. And that single idea, the idea of healing a divided country, is really the bedrock for everything else it proposes. Okay, so how does it plan to do that, to get to that unity? Well, the project is basically built on three big pillars. The very first one is all about reforming the government itself, arguing for some pretty major structural changes to make it more accountable. And right away, you can see a major clash of philosophies here. The document frames the debate like this. On one side, you have the goal of completely dismantling what's often called the administrative state. But on the other side, Project Reunification says, no, the answer isn't to dismantle these agencies, but to reform them, to make them more transparent and more accountable to everybody. So what does that reform actually look like on paper? Well, these proposals are huge. I mean, they're not small tweaks, that's for sure. They go right after the fundamental rules of the game in Washington. Everything from how long people can serve, to how elections are funded, to how a president is even elected. Okay, so from the nuts and bolts of government, the project's second pillar pivots to the people themselves. This whole section, Protecting People, lays out a roadmap for safeguarding individuals and the institutions that are supposed to support them. And again, we see another one of these big philosophical divides when it comes to national security. The document contrasts a view that focuses on defending borders and seeing threats as mainly external with its own argument that real security actually comes from working with other countries and getting to the root causes of global problems. And the specific protections it's calling for here are pretty broad. They really cover a lot of ground, from bolstering social safety nets like healthcare and student debt relief to defending intellectual freedom, and then jumping back into global agreements on huge issues like climate change and public health research. And that builds right into the third and final pillar, which is all about advancing equality. This is where the project really gets into the weeds on its vision for social and economic justice and for individual rights. This brings us to a really fundamental disagreement. I mean, it's about the very definition of the word liberty. The document contrasts one view, that liberty is about securing an individual's right to live freely, with its own take, that true liberty has to include social and economic rights too, the kind of rights that actually let people live with dignity. And the checklist of proposals to achieve this broader vision of liberty is, well, it's pretty extensive. It involves beefing up legal protections through things like the Civil Rights Act and court reform, but it also pushes for economic security through new policies on wages, housing, and social security. So that's the what, all the specific proposals. But what about the why? Why now? The document is crystal clear about its motivation. It frames this entire project as a necessary defense against what it sees as a very serious threat to democracy. The project doesn't pull any punches here. It grounds its entire argument in history, explicitly stating that the history of fascism provides critical lessons. That historical parallel is basically the lens through which it views this entire political moment.
It then lays out what it basically calls an authoritarian playbook, and it breaks it down into 3 stages. It describes this pattern that it argues we can see today, starting with economic despair to stir up public anger, then moving to nationalist us versus them rhetoric, and finally ending with direct attacks on democratic institutions themselves. So let's pull back for a second. When you put all of this together, what does a document like this actually mean for the bigger political conversation? Let's zoom out and just think about the choice of a future that these competing visions represent. Yeah, the feeling you get reading this whole thing is one of real urgency. Its authors aren't just presenting this as another 4-year political cycle. They're framing this as a genuine make or break moment, a fundamental fork in the road for the entire country. And that really leaves us with a huge question to chew on, doesn't it? In an age that feels so polarized, what role do these kinds of massive all-in manifestos, these competing blueprints for an entire country, actually play in shaping the path we all go down? It's definitely something to think about long after this explainer is over.